Imagine a world where the sun barely rises, casting only a pale, ghostly light over a land of jagged ice. Whether the year was 800, 1000, or 1050, the challenge of the North Atlantic remained a deadly constant. You wake up in total darkness, and outside your door the wind howls like a hungry wolf. The snow is piled so high you have to dig your way out just to see the grey sky. When you reach into the storage bin where the grain is kept, your fingers hit the cold, hard bottom. For a Viking, the greatest enemy wasn't a rival warrior with a sword, it was the silent, invisible ghost of starvation during the months of endless winter. How did thousands of people survive in a land where the ground stays frozen for half the year? There were no grocery stores and no way to grow a single leaf of food in the frozen dirt once the frost set in. The answer is a mix of brilliant science, brutal hard work, and a plan that started months before the first snowflake fell. Survival in the Viking Age was decided by food systems, not just muscles. They had to be masters of the calendar, understanding that every action taken in the summer was a deposit into a life-saving bank account for the winter. To survive a Viking winter, you had to start working the moment the ice melted in the spring. Vikings knew that winter was a ticking clock, and every sunny day was a race. While the sagas tell stories of famous raiders, most Vikings were actually farmers and herders at heart. They grew hardy grains like barley, rye, and oats. These crops were tough and could grow in the thin, rocky soil of Scandinavia and the North Atlantic islands. But growing the food was only the first step of the journey. The real challenge was making it last for 6 months without it rotting. In the summer heat, fresh meat and fish would turn into a poisonous mess in just 2 days. Without refrigerators, the Vikings used the 4 pillars of preservation to keep their larders full. They had to transform fresh, perishable items into stable, long-lasting fuel that could sit in a wooden bin for half a year without spoiling. The most common way to save food was drying. Vikings caught thousands of Atlantic cod, tied them by the tails, and hung them on giant wooden racks near the salty sea air. The cold wind blew through the fish for weeks, turning them into stockfish. This food became as hard as wood and could last for years. To eat it, you had to beat it with a hammer or soak it for hours, but it provided the life-saving protein needed to survive when the fields were under 6 feet of snow. Inside the longhouse, the central fire provided a second method: smoking. Vikings hung strips of deer or pork high in the rafters where the smoke gathered. The smoke coated the meat, creating a chemical shield against bugs and mold. Salting was another method, though salt was as valuable as gold. They would boil seawater for hours just to get a small amount of salt to pack their meat in. Finally, they used fermentation. By burying fish or putting meat in barrels of sour milk called whey, the natural acids pickled the food. It smelled very strong like old cheese, but it stayed safe to eat all winter long. Even with a full storehouse, things could easily go wrong. Rats could get into the grain, or dampness could cause mold to spread. When stored food ran low, Vikings became winter hunters. Using wooden skis to glide over deep snow, they tracked elk and reindeer for miles through the silent forests. A single elk could feed a whole family for weeks. They also practiced ice fishing, chopping holes through thick ice to reach fatty fish in the dark water below. Every single catch was a hard-fought victory against the hungry month. They also relied on the great trade. Viking sailors moved food long distances, trading for honey, dried fruits and nuts from warmer lands. These items were the energy bars of the ancient world. Honey, in particular, was a miracle food because it never spoils and provided a quick rush of energy for the exhausting work of chopping wood or clearing snow in a blizzard. These traded goods provided the vitamins that prevented scurvy and kept their bodies functional. In the Viking world, being selfish was a death sentence. Their culture was built on sharing and rationing. If a neighbor's barn burned down, the village helped feed them, knowing that next year they might be the ones in need. This was a social insurance policy. Inside the home, the head of the house, usually the mother, held the keys to the food chests. She carefully measured every handful of grain and every strip of fish. She knew that eating a full meal in December could mean a funeral in March. Children were often fed first because they were the future of the clan. Everyone had a job, and as long as you worked, you were fed. However, if the winter lasted too long, they reached a terrifying breaking point. They might have to eat their seed grain, the seeds meant for spring planting. This was a desperate gamble. Eating the seeds meant surviving today, but having nothing to grow tomorrow. It was the ultimate test of a family's will to survive. We often think of Vikings as warriors winning battles with axes and shields, but the real war of the North was won in the storehouse. The Vikings who survived were not just the strongest, but the ones who planned the best. They were the ones who understood the science of their environment and the importance of working together as a team. Strength didn't matter if you hadn't eaten in 10 days. Even the bravest warrior could be defeated by a tiny bit of mold in a grain bin. Today, we live in a world where we can get fresh fruit in the middle of a blizzard, and we have largely forgotten the fear the Vikings felt when the sun vanished. Their story teaches us that humans are incredibly clever and resilient. They turned a frozen wasteland into a home, not just with weapons, but with wisdom. They didn't just survive the winter, they conquered it by outthinking the cold,